And welcome to this reflection on Stave 3 of A Christmas Carol, which I entitled Scrooge Peers into the Margins. I'll do a creative writing exercise inspired by Stave 3 at the end, as usual. The summary, interestingly, and until I started sort of delineating this, I never realized that the summary of Stave 3 is just, this stave is built differently than the other ones, and that should be a point of conversation. But as we're getting used to, there's Scrooge in bed thinking for a couple of pages. Secondly, there's meeting this giant who is very different from this ghost who's very different from the previous ghost of Christmas Past. This is a jolly, sort of effervescent, magical giant, ghost of Christmas Present. And there's some just incredible descriptive paragraphs in history there, 72 to 78. Again, I'm using the Penguin Classics edition. Scrooge and the ghost visit Cratchit's home first, and we get about 6 pages of that backstory. Again, an area that Dickens, working with him, he never would have thought of the fact that Cratchit had a home and a family and a table and chairs he never thought of Cratchit's life. 4, we go briefly throughout the streets of London, and these are some of the moments that don't really make appearances in the film or stage productions. There's sort of a panoramic tour of London in the novel that a lot of film versions don't dedicate time to. He sees the ghost takes him to see the Christmas celebration of miners, and historically there's lots of discussion about the rights and safety for miners at the time. He sees 2 men in a lighthouse celebrating, so you can see that the Google Maps of Stave 3 is very different and extensive. They go on the ocean, and they see celebration on a ship. And then they go to Fred's home, his nephew's home, where he, sees the sort of gatherings that he's often invited to but never attends, and he responds surprisingly. And then the just incredible conclusion where he meets his figurative children, ignorance and want. Want meaning, in this case, like lack, poverty. And then Scrooge returns to bed. So you'll notice this chapter is constructed very differently than the other 2 have been. So I have 2 questions. I'm cheating. My 2 questions are: first, why is the chapter so geographically varied? And in a way, it's sort of all over the place. The centerpieces of it are obviously learning about Cratchit's circumstances, learning about his nephew and how his nephew manages his house and other people and the joy he brings. But there's a lot of other little tidbits here that sort of bring us geographically to lots of different kinds of places. We're on the ocean, we're in the city, we're all over the place, we're underground. And I can't help but to think, the novel doesn't say this, but it kind of does, that Scrooge is being shown that joy can exist in any context. That celebrating something like Christmas or celebrating a friend or celebrating family can happen in any context. And maybe he needed to be shown this in numerous contexts, even in moments like in a mine or in the loneliness of a lighthouse or in the poverty of Cratchit's house. He needed to see joy in situations where he never associated joy, because anything like joy to Scrooge only had to deal with gain and money. So maybe he just needed to see all of this. But as a reading experience, it's a good reminder for us too of the same thing. And then I have to say this: I read this book out loud, and the part I dread every year are the Cratchit scenes, because of one of my favorite literary terms, bathos, which means just like hyper over the top, sappy, in this case, goodness, you know, like Hallmark card characters in a way. And, if you're in anything like a normal family, whatever that is, I don't know. I don't know lots of people who talk like the Cratchits. But what do we do with it? So I always tell my students, if you come to a roadblock in a book or something that you think is a problem in a book or something you're struggling with, address it, like address the roadblock. And to me, the roadblock to A Christmas Carol every time I read it is dealing with the Cratchits. And I don't know, like part of me thinks that it's sort of like every once in a while, I'll meet somebody, whether it's a student or a student's parent or friend, who just is like really sweet and sincere and doesn't do irony or sarcasm, and they're just nice all the time. When we meet people like that, it is peculiar, and I think the Cratchits have some of that. I also think that there's a wisdom in being the Cratchits, that when you struggle like they struggle, what they can afford is loving each other. And Dickens very rarely, if ever, in any of his novels, creates characters like this without a little darkness. And the darkness in the Cratchit's life is Tim, the Cratchit's handicapped son, who probably has rickets or something like that. And you can't, it's difficult to question a family's goodness for long when you realize that they're probably just trying to love each other and stay together as they see the imminent, death of one of their own. So I think the over the top happiness needs to be seen in light of the darkness in the corner with the crutch. And I think that makes the sort of sappiness readable and maybe even understandable. Like, of course we would take great joy in dad coming home. Of course we would take great joy in, mother's Christmas pudding. Of everything would be over the top. And maybe they're just trying to make things great for little Tim, who maybe won't experience many more of these things. Okay. This is, I think, the most powerful passage in the chapter. It's near the end. And Scrooge has seen all these visions of the present. And Scrooge notices that there's something under the spirit's robe. And it's a rare instance in Dickens of using allegory, taking an idea and making it like a person, right? So anyway, here it is. "Forgive me if I'm not justified in what I ask," said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe. "But I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?" "It might be a claw for the flesh there is upon it," was the spirit's sorrowful reply. "Look here." From the foldings of its robe it brought two children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. "Man, look here, look down here," exclaimed the ghost. That sentence, by the way, is something Scrooge has never done, right? He's never looked. They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate, too, in their humility. Where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints, a stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out, menacing. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade, through all the mysteries of wonderful creation, has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves rather than be parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude. "Spirit, are they yours?" Scrooge could say no more. "They are man's," said the spirit, looking down upon them. "And they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware them both in all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased." "Deny it," cried the spirit, stretching out its hands toward the city. "Slander those who tell it ye, admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and abide the end." "Have they no refuge or resource?" cried Scrooge. "Are there no prisons?" said the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words. "Are there no workhouses?" The bell struck 12. The Scrooge looked about him for the ghost, and saw it not. At the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifted up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him. It's an incredibly powerful scene where feelings and thoughts of poverty and ignorance that the ghost and Jacob Marley are hoping to show Scrooge for his conversion, these thoughts end up becoming humans. They're embodied right in front of him. I want to share with you something that that Dickens wrote, or that his biographer Forster wrote, um, when talking about his experience being a poor child himself, working in the blackening factory. And Dickens wrote, well, Forster wrote that he had been like these children himself once when he was taken out of school um, to work in Warren's blackening warehouse. And Dickens wrote this: I know I do not exaggerate consciously and unintentionally the scantiness of my resources and the difficulties of my life. I know that if a shilling or so were given me by anyone, I spent it on a dinner or a tea. I know that I worked from morning to night with common men and boys, a shabby child. I know that I have lounged about the streets insufficiently and unsatisfactorily fed. I know that, but for the mercy of God, I might have easily been, for any care that was taken of me, a little robber or a little vagabond. And Forster, his friend, says this: he was not only a companion of these demon children, but one of them. And then later in a speech to the Polytechnic Institute, about a month after A Christmas Carol came out, was published, early in 1844, Dickens says, there is a spirit of great power, the spirit of ignorance, long shut up in a vessel of obstinate neglect, with a great deal of lead in its composition, and sealed with the seal of many, many Solomons, and which is exactly in the same position. Release it in time, and it will bless, restore, and reanimate society. But let it lie under the rolling waves of years, and its blind revenge at last will be destruction. So I think another sort of layer of this is Dickens' own personal stake in these children, in that he was one of them. I think that's a really interesting insight. Okay, here's a fun vocabulary word, because for American readers, um, it's not what we think. My kids would have pudding pops and pudding cups. The Christmas pudding isn't that. It's a figgy pudding is a steamed dome-shaped cake baked in a water bath in the oven. It often has alcohol in it and dried fruit. It's a pretty traditional English dessert, and it's more like cake than what Americans would think of as pudding. And it was originally supposed to have 13 ingredients representing Jesus and the apostles. Um, but this is sort of like the culinary centerpiece of the Cratchit Christmas, the goose, and then this. And they make a big deal out of this, and she's worried about the quantity of flour. And I never know, is she worried about the quantity of flour, like did she put in the right amount? Or is she worried about the quantity of flour because she might not have had enough flour uh, because of financial reasons? But anyway, here's a little fun vocabulary term. And I think in the future, I'm going to have, for extra credit, I might have my students try to make an English Christmas pudding. When it comes to food, my students generally like extra credit. Okay. Um, I've written poems like this that are just a list of images, and I think Dickens is excellent at doing this, and I think it's handy. The one I wrote, I don't know if I'm going to use in my final draft, but it's just a reminder of all the things you could include if you're describing like a place, for example. So um, imagine the main setting of your story and name it, and name two actions happening there. So again, with this set of prompts, you can pause the video obviously at any time. Okay, so my mother organized the presents to be opened, stockings first, and my father, at his usual post near the wood stove, had a trusty Glad trash bag for the carnage that was about to ensue. Okay, so that's me. That's Christmas morning in my house growing up, what my parents would do. So, secondly, again, pause the video wherever. Mention something specific on the ground level, and then compare it imaginatively to something else. Use a simile. So just think of the image, think of something on the low level, name something specific, and then compare it to something else. Next to our fluffy maroon couch lay our annual gift of toothbrushes, like the festive version of Brussels sprouts we are resisting at all costs. It's funny, I love Brussels sprouts now, roasting them, but I never would have eaten them as a kid. All right, third, almost done. Name another specific object in the space detail of the setting, and give it three specific adjectives, and then personify it. Imagine it acting it in some way. There it lay, my brand new shiny silver boombox, quite literally begging me to use its dual cassette players to record my favorite songs off of 1041 WBCN, my favorite station. You obviously could record one tape onto a blank tape, which was very exciting. And you could use a cassette to record on the radio too. The good old days. Mention another object or detail that has sentimental significance to you, and then name a specific memory or association you have. So think of the room, the space you're in, and name something, and if you can, something with sentimental significance, or something that you have like a memory attached to it. Throughout the entire morning, the old family Gulbranson piano, once my mother's and now mine, sat quietly in the corner, awaiting my reluctant fingers to practice scales and arpeggios, not realizing that my day was full of the music of present opening and candy eating. Yeah. So here's where I stole this from. And this is just a paragraph walking us through a chunk that I don't think anybody would pay wicked close attention to as we're analyzing this. If you're writing a paper, if a teacher, if you're making a test on Dickens, you're probably not including this. But Scrooge is taken by the ghost of Christmas Present intentionally throughout the common streets of London, where all of these things are happening. For the people who were shoveling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball, better-natured missile far than many a wordy jest, laughing heartily if it went right and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out in the street in their apoplectic opulence. They were ruddy brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions, shining in the fatness of their growth like Spanish friars, and winking from their shelves in wanton slyness at the girls as they went by and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from conspicuous hooks that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods, and pleasant shufflings ankle-deep through withered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squat and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, and in the great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a dull and stagnant blooded race, appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round their little world in slow, impassionless excitement. I just think there's so many amazing things. Look at what he notices here, right? And every little moment he honors with an adjective or a specific action. We have to wonder, too, is Scrooge noticing these things for the first time? How often do we in the grocery store just stop and look around at all the different people doing this and all the excitement and all the diversity of food and how amazing it is that we have access to it? So I think this is a really good kind of writing to practice in personal narrative writing. It's just paying really close attention to what's literally there and honoring it with description. I hope this video helps, and have a great day and good luck with your reading.